Man o' War was one of the greatest racehorses to ever have lived. Not only was he a great racehorse, but he was also a great sire. His greatest son was War Admiral. War Admiral's dam was Brushup, a mare who had failed to win any races. Brushup's dam meaning her mother, had produced many stakes winners when bred to Man o' War. So they thought, well, Brushup's mother did well with Man o' War, let's send Brushup to Man o' War. So they did.
Hold it. I thought this video series was about Seabiscuit.
Well, it is kind of, but every great underdog story needs a challenger.
So we're doing a whole video just on the challenger?
Well, we are doing a second video on the challenger at some point.
Hello, I'm Charles.
And I'm James.
We love history, and we want to share our love of history with you.
And today, as we are continuing with our series on Seabiscuit, we have to welcome once again our horse-crazy sister, Andrea.
And in-house music historian.
Sort of.
Whatever. This part of Seabiscuit will be focusing on War Admiral.
The opposition. Although contrary to the movie, he was not that big. He was a bit of a runt himself.
Let's dive in.
War Admiral was not really an impressive-looking colt. His owner, Samuel Riddle, who also owned Man o' War, even tried to sell him at one point. War Admiral resembled his dam more than his sire. This was something that Riddle was not really happy with because Brushup hadn't won any races, so he was probably thinking like mother, like son kind of a thought process. I mean, she did look nice, but she was small. Much smaller than Man o' War. War Admiral, at 3 years old, was only 15.2 hands tall at the withers, so he was small as well.
Wait a minute! What the heck is a hand?
It used to be horses were measured by the hand, the width of the hand from like the thumb to the top of the palm. This on average was about 4 inches. So when we're measuring horses, we measure them in hands or 4 inches. One hand equals 4 inches. So 15.2 hands is about a little over 60 inches, which 60 inches is 5 feet. And the withers is located right at the bottom of the neck, which on this model is really hard to see because of the mane. But there's a kind of a little ridge bump right at the base of the neck, and that's the withers, and that's where they measure to, from the withers to the bottom of their hoof. So he was a little over 5 feet tall from the bottom of his hoof to about the base of the neck.
Okay, sounds good. George Conway was War Admiral's trainer. Based on comments he made, he seemed very knowledgeable about champion horses of the 19th century, especially the 1880s. He eventually became head trainer at Samuel Riddle's farm in 1926, having worked for Samuel Riddle as a trainer since probably around 1914. The Riddle stable did not have a lot of successes with horses between another of Man o' War's sons, Crusader, in the mid to late 1920s, until War Admiral in the late 1930s. So when War Admiral started winning big like his father, it was a big deal for the farm. War Admiral's debut as a racehorse was on April 25th, 1936, in Maryland at a not very popular racetrack. At 7.5 to 1, War Admiral won by nose with fighting spirit and quickness against his racemate. 1 month later, he raced again, but this time at Belmont Park, which was even then a headquarters to the upscale racing circuit. War Admiral's Maryland win didn't impress New Yorkers, and he was set off at 10-1 on May 21st. War Admiral showed early speed again at this race and won by 2 lengths in the 5-furlong race.
Just a few weeks later, on June 6th, War Admiral ran in the National Stallion Stakes. He was a close second in odds behind another unbeaten colt, Pompoon. Remember that name as he'll pop up later again. Pompoon was more advanced in his racing career and beat War Admiral, who came in third. However, his time for this race was slower than War Admiral's time for a previous race by 1/5 of a second. Pompoon won his next races and was at least briefly considered the greatest 2-year-old since insert big name horse here, which was often Man o' War. War Admiral, on the other hand, lost his next race 3 weeks after the National Stallion Stakes. This loss made War Admiral lose face amongst the public. War Admiral had seemed to weaken at the end of the race, being beaten by a latecomer, a horse named Fairy Hill. One more thing to note about this race was that this was the first time jockey Charlie Kurtzinger rode the colt. Kurtzinger began to consistently ride the colt from then on.
Despite War Admiral's second defeat, the stable still had confidence in the young colt. However, it took a while, 2.5 months, before War Admiral could redeem himself as he contracted a coughing sickness that summer, which was going around the eastern racetracks, especially in the 2-year-olds. This illness could have been a reason why War Admiral lost his second race, the Great American Stakes, but we'll never know for certain. War Admiral was also not nominated for some of the richest and major futurity races coming up, so in a way, War Admiral's illness might have been a good thing. Because War Admiral couldn't run in the big Belmont Futurity race on October 3rd due to eligibility rules, George Conway took War Admiral back to Maryland for his next race on September 19th, the 6-furlong Eastern Shore Handicap. Kurtzinger was again riding the colt and was sent off at 8-1 odds.
War Admiral drew the outside post, stall 15 out of a field of 15. That's bad! Kurtzinger sent War Admiral right to the front with blazing speed. The field held many good 2-year-old colts, but War Admiral dominated the competition, running a 1/4 mile in 22 3/5 seconds, and the half mile in 45 4/5 seconds. War Admiral was now showing a promise of what was to come. At the half mile, he was 4 lengths ahead, and he only increased his lead from there, finishing 5 lengths ahead and being only 2/5 of a second slower than the track record. This win, however, caused War Admiral to be handicapped with a heavier weight than the next time he raced. In War Admiral's next race, the Richard Johnson Handicap, also in Maryland, he was assigned to carry 124 pounds, which was 4 pounds heavier than the second highest weight, Billionaire. The track was muddy, but Kurtzinger again took War Admiral to the lead at the beginning of the race. Despite his very best efforts, the extra weight and the mud cost War Admiral the victory, and was beaten by Bottle Cap, who only carried 119 pounds by 1 1/2 lengths.
Pompoon was also beaten in the New England Fatuity at the end of the 1936 racing season. He did win the title of champion 2-year-old for 1936 and was considered to be the favorite to win the 1937 Kentucky Derby. He won 6 out of 8 races in 1936. War Admiral won 3 out of 6. Both Pompoon and War Admiral were rated in the experimental free handicap, which was a weight-based assessment on the year's 2-year-olds. Pompoon was rated at 125 pounds at second highest on the list, and War Admiral rated at 121 pounds, 7th overall on the list.
1937 dawned with a new racing season. War Admiral's sire, Man o' War, had not run in the Kentucky Derby because Samuel Riddle thought that distance, 1¼ mile, was too much, too early in a young racehorse's career. It has also been rumored that he didn't really care for Kentucky racing, and he did mostly race his horses in Maryland and New York. However, in 1937, Riddle was allowing a trainer to aim a horse with a derby, and that horse was War Admiral. This change in thinking could be that the American Triple Crown was now an official thing. In Man o' War's time, the Derby, Preakness, and Belmont were not recognized as a trio of very important races in the way it is today. Yes, they were still important races, but they weren't linked like they are now. It was an achievement, to be sure, to win all three of these races, but when Gallant Fox won in 1930, it became a thing, and looking back, another horse, Sir Barton, had also swept all three races. Fun fact, Sir Barton was beaten by Man o' War in a match race. War Admiral's first race as a 3-year-old was on April 12th in a 6-furlong allowance race. War Admiral carried top weight with Kurtzinger aboard and went to the lead early again and won by 2.5 lengths. 10 days later, War Admiral again raced at the Chesapeake Stakes, which was 1 mile and 1/16 long. War Admiral made the race his own, despite the longest distance of his career, and won by 6 lengths.
The Chesapeake was also a preview of something else in War Admiral's life. He is credited for making the race start 7 minutes late. He later became known for his altercations at the starting gate, and often started outside of the gate. With the Chesapeake Stakes behind him, it was off to the Derby. Pompoon was also entered into the Derby. War Admiral was the favorite at 3-2, and Pompoon was third choice at 8-1. War Admiral had first stall position on the rail, which was a concern. Wait. If he's closest to the rail, why is this a concern? I thought being on the rail was a good thing.
Well, here's the thing. At Churchill Downs, where the Kentucky Derby is run, for a 1.25 mile race to end at the official finish pole, they have to start the horses on the turn. So that first stall, if you go straight ahead, you're literally going to run smack dab into the rail. So you have to get away from the rail as soon as possible. Nowadays, this is my understanding, is they actually don't use the first stall anymore. They put horse number 1 into the second stall, so they don't have that going straight into the rail. But in 1930s like this, they didn't do that. So he was aiming straight for the rail if he went straight.
Okay. Makes sense. War Admiral, along with several other horses, made the loading process a little bit difficult, and delayed the start of the Derby by 8 minutes. However, War Admiral was all professional when the race started, going right for the lead. Kurtzinger rode cautiously, but there was nothing to be worried about, as War Admiral led by a length most of the way around the track. His fractions for the first half mile of the race were actually slightly faster than Secretariat's times nearly 40 years later. Secretariat, who had just smashed all the records, said still no one has come up close to breaking. Pompoon came up to attempt a challenge against the Admiral, but War Admiral drew ahead, increasing his lead to 3 lengths. War Admiral finished with a time of 2 minutes 3 seconds and 1/5, which was the second fastest Derby. Charlie Kurtzinger, also known as the Little Flying Dutchman, had ridden the 2 fastest Derbies on record. Today, the Derby, Preakness, and Belmont have fixed days on which they are run. In 1937, they were not fixed. There had even been 2 years where it would have been impossible to have a Triple Crown winner, due to the fact that 2 of the 3 races were being raced on the same day. You just can't race in Kentucky and Maryland at the same day. It's just not done. Unless you're Bugs Bunny, then you might be able to handle it. But unless you're Bugs Bunny, you can't do it. However, this happened before the Triple Crown was a thing. In 1937, the Preakness was only 1 week after the Derby. Today, a trainer would be taken out and shot if he would allow a horse to be raced 1 week after another big race. I mean, that's too much for a horse. 30s, not a big deal. In fact, it was very common to be racing back to back to back. I mean, the amount of races that a horse back then would race in 1 year might be about the same as horses run in their life today. One of the reasons due to this change is possibly due to the fact that at that time, to train, you just race. Racing a horse is just as good as training it. Whereas today, they train to win a race. So, that may be part of it.
War Admiral was again the favorite at 35 to 100. Pompoon also ran in the Preakness. War Admiral again had the rail position and again delayed the start of the race by continually walking through the gate. Wait, I thought there was a barrier in front of the horses.
Nowadays, there is a more official barrier gate in front of the horses so they can't just go straight on the track. But in the 30s, this wasn't a thing. It was just an open walkway where they would stand in there, and when the bell would ring, then they could go. But there wasn't an actual barrier to stop them from keep going on through.
Okay. Once again, War Admiral and Kurt Singer took the lead and again took the horse away from the rail like he had done in the Derby. While this caused the colt to lose ground on the turn, they found firmer footing. Pompoon settled into second place in the backstretch, a length behind War Admiral. On the turn, he came up on War Admiral, but War Admiral prevailed, winning by a head. War Admiral again held the second fastest Preakness on record, being only 1/5 of a second behind the fastest time. His time was 1 minute 58 and 2/5 of a second. Some people believe the only reason Pompoon was able to come so close to War Admiral was because Kurt Singer took the final turn so wide and Pompoon cut behind War Admiral and took the rail position, saving him slightly around a length. 3 weeks later was the Belmont. In the weeks before the Belmont, trainer George Conway had War Admiral run the entire length of the Belmont 3 times in workouts, which is a lot. Very few trainers would even do this once. War Admiral was again the favorite at 4 to 5. Pompoon was 3 to 1. War Admiral drew the outside post for the Belmont and again delayed the start by breaking through the open gate system of the day. Although he wasn't the only horse causing problems. War Admiral started badly by hitting the starting gate with his hoof, cutting off part of his hoof which bled freely. Some reports say that Kurt Singer thought his game little champion was going down, but War Admiral continued to take the lead as before, with a 3-length lead. This lead only increased to 4 lengths as blood flew from War Admiral's hoof and clung to his belly. War Admiral's time at the 1 1/4 mark was faster than his Derby time, and his 1.3 furlong was faster than Sir Barton's time in 1919, which was also how long the Belmont was at that time. War Admiral broke the track and the stakes record with a finishing time of 2 minutes 28 3/5 seconds for the 1.5 mile long race. He even beat his sire's track record from 1920. Pompoon finished 6th out of the field of 7. This win made War Admiral the 4th ever Triple Crown winner.
Because of his hoof injury at the Belmont, almost 5 months passed before the new Triple Crown winner raced again. It was an allowance race that let War Admiral only carry 106 pounds, but his opponents were very accomplished. Even so, he was sent off at 2-5 odds. Once more, Kurt Singer took War Admiral right to the lead and won the race by 2.5 lengths. 4 days later, War Admiral ran in the Washington Handicap. It was at this race that the first possibility of racing against one of the biggest racing stars in the United States happened. That horse was Seabiscuit. War Admiral was assigned 126 pounds, and Seabiscuit, who was a year older, was assigned 130 pounds. However, the meeting was not to be, as Seabiscuit was not entered into the race because of missed work due to rain. Seabiscuit hated the mud. War Admiral won the Washington, which brought his total earnings to $160,820, which in 1930s was a decent amount of money. 4 days after that, War Admiral won the Pimlico Special in a hard run due to extra weight and a poor start. With this win, War Admiral won all 8 of his 1937 races.
1938 began, and War Admiral was now a 4-year-old beginning his handicap racing season. As a champion racehorse and a 4-year-old, War Admiral would have to carry heavier weights just to give the other horses a chance of victory. He was shipped to Florida for the Widener Cup Handicap on March 5th. He had several opportunities to run in races, but Sam Riddle did not want to accept the 130-pound weight requirements for the prep races when he had to carry that same weight in the big event. So it was a month and a half before War Admiral ran his first race in Florida. It was a 7-furlong race where War Admiral was only required to carry 122 pounds. He again acted up at the starting gate and had to start on the outside of the starting gate. Even so, War Admiral, with Kurt Singer on board, went right to the lead and won by 1 1/2 lengths. Although at one point, he did have a 4-length lead, which Kurt Singer reined back, probably to make sure there was no chance of wearing out his mount. On the day of the Widener, War Admiral was the favorite at 4-5 odds and carried 13 to 28 more pounds of weight than the other 12 starters. War Admiral again started on the outside of the gate and went straight for the lead. He won again by 1 1/2 lengths, with Kurt Singer holding him back. Seabiscuit was also running that day at the Santa Anita Handicap, but sadly, he lost by a nose to a 3-year-old who carried 30 pounds less than the now 5-year-old. A meeting between these two great racehorses was on everyone's minds, as they were probably the two best racehorses of their time. Charles Howard, Seabiscuit's owner, wanted a meeting to happen and work towards the goal, even going so far as to suggest a $100,000 match race. Remember, previously War Admiral had won $160,000. That's a lot of money! The race was set for Memorial Day, winner take all, at 1 1/4 miles, each horse carrying 126 pounds. There was lots of talk about who would win, and potential odds circulated as race day, March 30th, drew closer. 6 days before the race, Seabiscuit had to pull out. Because of this, War Admiral was entered into the Suburban Stakes, which was to be run on March 28th, and was assigned 132 pounds. It rained the evening before, making the track muddy, and Trader Conway decided to scratch War Admiral. The public was very disappointed in the scratching, as many people had come to see the race.
1 week later, War Admiral ran in the Queens County Handicap. He ran against the winner of the Suburban, Snark, who carried 6 pounds less than War Admiral's 132. Surprisingly, War Admiral didn't throw a fit at the starting gate. Kurtzinger also didn't take him immediately to the lead, as he was very conscious of the weight War Admiral had to carry. Despite the weight, and going wide on the final turn, War Admiral beat Snark by a length. 3 weeks later, War Admiral and Seabiscuit were set to meet at the Massachusetts Handicap. But, due to several days of rain and an injury, Seabiscuit was scratched at the last possible minute. Riddle wasn't thrilled about running his little champion in the deep mud, but did anyway. War Admiral finished 4th, his first loss since his 2-year-old season. In his next race, War Admiral redeemed himself by winning the Wilson Stakes, and then the Saratoga Handicap. 3 weeks after that, he ran in the Whitney Stakes. For the first time since his 3rd race, War Admiral was not ridden by Kurtzinger, who had been injured. Despite this, War Admiral again won. August 27th was War Admiral's longest race yet, at 1 3/4 miles. War Admiral's first jockey ever was up on him for this race, and the pair won by 4 lengths. Next was the Jockey Club Gold Cup, where it was hoped that War Admiral and Seabiscuit would meet. But again, it was not to be, and War Admiral won that race as well.
Time was running short if the two great American racehorse idols of the 30s were to meet. Alfred Vanderbilt, who had taken over the operations at Pimlico, offered a match race between the two horses. The purse would be $15,000. The length of the race, 1 mile and 3/16. Riddle insisted that George Cassidy from New York start the race, and that it would be a walk-up start instead of using a starting gate. Both horses would carry 120 pounds. The date was set for Tuesday, November 1st.
Well, this is going to be it for our story of War Admiral. Next week, we will continue the story of Seabiscuit up until the match race. After that, we'll do the match race.
So, if you want to be informed when we do these videos, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so that you may always be notified. And if you like this video, please hit that like button so that we can beat YouTube's algorithm.
And so, until our next adventure, see you later.